Welcome to the C-Suite Spot. This is where I interview inspiring C-suite leaders from my network, and I'm checking in on them to see how they're coping in these challenging times. Last week, we gained some great insights from Frank Robinson, the CEO of QX Global Group. And this week, we move to the world of finance in the City of London. I'm delighted to welcome to the C-Suite Spot, Jim Keeling. Jim is chairman of Corbett Keeling, the city-based corporate finance firm, which he set up 25 years ago. And he's also president of Global Scope, the international family of M&A advisors, which has offices across the globe. They primarily advise owners on selling their businesses. And prior to setting up Corbett Keeling, Jim spent 5 years at KPMG, where he qualified as a chartered accountant, having first graduated from Oxford University. Jim is joining me from his family home in rural Sussex. Jim, welcome.
Good morning, Rob. Really nice to see you.
Oh, thank you. Now, Jim, as you know, the format's a sort of 5-question format, probably about 15 to 20 minutes, hopefully very relaxed. I know the listeners and the viewers are really keen to hear your insights and wisdom. So the first question, Jim, is could you briefly describe what Corbett Keeling does and what unique challenges your industry has faced in this coronavirus lockdown?
Okay, thanks, Rob. We sell businesses and we raise funding for businesses, and they are primarily UK private businesses, owner managed, making 1 to 10 million of profit. They could be across all sectors, but quite a lot of them are in your sector, the food sector. And I started Corbett Keeling 25 years ago during a period that was known then in the city as Big Bang, a time of intense financial deregulation. And one might say that the moral compass of the city went astray a bit then. I had grown up actually down here in this house where I'm living now, watching my father and grandfather do the same sort of things as I'm doing now. And I've seen them do that with integrity. And I wanted to be amongst those who are putting a bit of integrity back into finance. And so I started up on my own. And we have focused on selling businesses and raising money for businesses for 25 years.
Brilliant. And Jim, I've known you for several years now, and I've certainly seen the points of difference that Corbett Keeling under your leadership brings. You've had an interesting career, and I know you've experienced many challenges over that time. I'd be fascinated to know how you see this current crisis compared to the other ones you've faced, and how you've used those previous experiences to help you tackle this one.
Well, it is a fascinating crisis, this. It's a fascinating step change for businesses. It's been quite easy for us, Rob. We are able to work virtually relatively easily. And indeed, a large portion of our team who are sector specialists focused on the food sector or on other sectors have always operated remotely. So none of that was too new for us. And it was pretty seamless to get out of our office in the city and operate from our home. I've got a friend who's an old client and became a close friend, who operates a global business, and he sits in his office in Chicago. He operates it all over the world. Quite quickly, I rang him and I said, Dan, how have you done this? How have you managed your business globally all this time? And he said, well, quite a few things, but in particular, use video. Insist that your team use video. If you're talking to them one-on-one, use FaceTime. It works perfectly well. If you're doing anything with more than one person, then get on a Zoom call or get on a Microsoft Teams call and do the same with your clients. It's perfectly possible to pitch to clients over video. There are one or two things where you've got to sit down for a meal with somebody where it's a little bit more difficult, but you can operate remotely. So I was really encouraged by that. Our business is probably going to be one of the last to be operating the way it used to. We can do it so easily remotely, but the real challenge is for our clients. And one of the fascinating things about what we do is that we see clients across all sectors and in all sorts of situations. And as one banker said to us just this morning, actually, it's about a third, a third, a third. A third face dire difficulties or some difficulties. A third is sort of neutralish, the whole lockdown situation. And a third, actually, they're the winners. And it's obvious we can see some of the winners, the supermarkets and others. And one can see some of the people who are finding it really difficult, like those in the leisure industry. And our hearts, as it were, go out to them. But we're seeing it across the sector. We've got one business that has actually been cut in half, you might say. They are a global logistics business. One half has completely stopped overnight, like businesses in the leisure trade would have done. The other half has absolutely gone through the roof. So my friend there, our client there, spends half his time working out how furlough works in 25 different jurisdictions all over the world for the half of his business that he's had to shut down. And he spends the other half of his life for the last 6 or 7 weeks grabbing the most amazing opportunities that actually, in their case, are more than making up for the business that has stopped. So it's well, as someone once said, perhaps it's a game of two halves. You know, there are different people affected in different ways.
Yeah, and I think what's also fascinating is the breadth of the sectors you work in and the characters and personalities you come into contact with, especially given your global scope role. But another question I was going to ask you was, have you had a crisis process ready to break the glass and bring out to use, or have you just drawn upon your kind of instinct and worked as a team or firefighting issues on a daily basis? I think that would be really interesting for people to understand how it's worked for Corbett Keeling.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And again, I'd say for us ourselves, it's relatively easy. We are as global scope. We are 55 firms all over the world, and I'm president of that group. But we all operate independently, and it's up to each member firm to have their own way of operating in a crisis. So I've not had to worry about, we in London have not had to worry about the other 54 branches, as it were, around the world at Corbett Keeling. For ourselves, it's relatively straightforward to operate remotely. So really, the issues are to do with our clients and will our clients still need our services or not? That's what it's really more about.
Yes. And Jim, one of the questions I've been asking some of the leaders in these sessions is more of a personal front. I mean, we're all human. And I read this morning that the UK is the most anxious country in the world at the moment in terms of how we are facing into this crisis and how it's affecting us. I know there's a real concern over well-being. You as a leader, how are you coping? You know, how are things with you in terms of how you're having to communicate remotely with your team, etc.?
Well, I think it's crucial as a leader when there's a crisis to step up, and I'd have to ask you to ask my team whether I've been able to step up during this period. It's as a follower, you look to your leader to step up. I think that's why it was so difficult when Boris was in hospital. We're looking to him, his cabinet is looking to him, and actually there was a bit of a vacuum of leadership then. Fortunately, the path had been set, the sails had been set in advance of that, and so it was okay. So I think it's vital as a leader to step up. to make decisions and to be seen to be making decisions. Obviously, they've got to be good decisions as well. Otherwise, you'll find that the troops are not following you. I remember that actually in the woods around here, trying to persuade our family or our guests to go out for a walk after lunch. You get them excited about that, and you get them out into the woods. Actually, when you get there, you've got to make sure you don't get lost and you get the right route home, and they don't all get too muddy and the children don't start to cry. But it's the same in every walk of life. You've got to step up, you've got to encourage the troops, you've got to make the decisions, then the decisions have got to be good, and you've got to get the troops to the destination. So I suppose that's what we've been doing, but I'm very blessed with an amazing team who have also stepped up. So when we found that we were doing a daily video call to talk to each other, I found that everybody was chipping in. It was almost as though everybody had actually gone up an order of magnitude in their performance. So I suppose have good people around you as well.
Yeah, and I'm typically modest there. And I think from my experience, your leadership style has been very collaborative. You surround yourself with bright people who are used to working in quite intense, pressurized circumstances. So thank you for sharing that. And I guess the final question would be, and this is a tricky one, Jim. So if you had your crystal ball, and to be fair, you have got a wider perspective than most leaders, given your role at Global Scope and the multi-sectors you work with. What's your prognosis for business in this? I know you've touched on different sectors, but what do you think generally we're going to hear over the next week or so, and how is business going to emerge from this tragedy?
Well, Rob, very interesting. We're busy at the moment. We're as busy as ever at the moment. And what will happen coming out of this is that the buyers of businesses and the funders of businesses will fundamentally ignore what has gone on during lockdown. They will, in our terminology, in their terminology, call it an exceptional one-off event that is irrelevant. They call it that, we call it that, because it is irrelevant to the future earnings capability of a business. So they'll ignore that. They'll look at the underlying earnings of the business going forward, and they'll value the business on that basis. So if that has actually been unaffected in the long term, the business is still worth what it was before lockdown. And it is still absolutely possible for owners to sell their businesses and exit their businesses. And it is absolutely valid for them even to be getting ready for that right now. So I believe that M&A activity will return. The buyers and the funders are still there. We talk to them every day. We're talking to a trade buyer at the moment about buying one of our clients. We're talking to financial buyers about buying another of our clients, even now during lockdown. And all the more so, they will be back as soon as this is finished.
Jim, I'd just like to say thanks for your time. I know you've got to get back to it, probably numerous Zoom calls and various other things, but thank you so much for joining and sharing some of your insights with us today. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Rob.